Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today. Welcome to filmandtvreview.com. Catch the latest film, TV and streamed show reviews every week. The views and opinions expressed by the authors and those providing comments are theirs alone. They do not reflect the views, opinions or position of filmandtvreview.com or their respective parent companies or affiliates. Filmandtvreview.com makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and is for entertainment purposes only. Episodes may contain adult humor and language. For full terms and conditions, see filmandtvreview.com. Welcome to this filmandtvreview.com special. Robocop, a 1987 American science fiction action film, directed by Paul Verhoeven, and written by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner, is set in a dystopic and crime-ridden Detroit. It tells a tale of a terminally wounded cop, who returns to the force as a powerful cyborg haunted by submerged memories. It is a sharp satire on technology, corporate politics, mass consumerism, and violent crime in America. Robocop became a pop culture phenomenon, and is regarded now as a cinematic classic. Our reviewers James and Richard join our host in this retrospective special.
Hello and welcome to our film and TV review special. Today I'm joined by James and Richard. And today we're going to be discussing a film classic. Today's special is on the 1987 film Robocop by Orion Pictures. Science fiction, stroke satire, soap action classic, starring Peter Weller and directed by Paul Verhoeven. To put it in a genre, it's so difficult. I'd say it's almost satire. It's action, it's comic book, it's all these tropes but mixed into it. And originally it was a script written really for adults. As the co-writers there, in my mind, a classic. But described richly as maybe a science fiction if you look at most reviews at the time and even now. But my question is, what genre is Robocop?
I'm using a genre that doesn't exist, but I'm using for that kind of movie, which is what I call smart sci-fi. What I mean is that I call smart sci-fi. It is for me a sci-fi movie, but the director, the writer, whoever is using science fiction as a social comment, or at least trying to actually to comment on the society. So in that case, the 80s. But to be honest, I think there are a lot of things actually in that movie that can be also used as a commentary about nowadays, actually, about the society of the 21st century. There are some sci-fi movies that I call them smart because, they use these dystopian futures to actually in a way to warn us people, let's say in the real world, or of mistakes that we have made and mistakes that we can repeat. And and maybe the path that we are on, but actually we should change. I'm not sure if I'm clear. In the case of Robocop, for example, it's the idea of, for example, there are many topics, but for example, the idea of at what price, what cost do you want security in a society? Would you accept the freedom to be taken from people, and also even taken actually the free will of some human beings, some police officers, to make sure actually that security exists? And of course, also the idea of AI, but I think we're going to talk about this and the AI and how to use properly AI in a society. So yeah, that's how I call it, smart sci-fi.
James, from the script, what do you think of it, or what's your overall kind of like view of the script? Because I've never seen. Well, what it makes it. I mean, it's a favorite of yours, but why would you say
it is? And I always feel slightly silly saying it's my favorite film of all time because of the title. But every time I rewatch it, or if I just stop and think about it, to be honest, I don't feel silly at all, because I think there's so many great elements that are put together. As you both said, there are things that really come through that are still relevant today. I mean, in terms of when it's set, so it sort of says the near future, which is a good thing to say with sci-fi, I think. I always remember Demolition Man, where they said that it was set in 1994 and it was made in 1993. So by the time it come out on VHS, it was already in the past. And it just seemed like such a dumb thing to do. The arcade game says it's 1990. There was a Marvel comic adaptation that said it was 2015. MGM, then, when they acquired the film in the noughties, did a DVD trailer to sort of promote the DVD release, and they said it was in 2029. And the novelization says it's in 2043, which is because there's a media break joke about President Stallone dying at a certain age, and someone jumped on that and said, well, if he died at that age, then this is set in 2043. So nobody really knows. And as a producer, John Davidson, said, although it is meant to be in the future, it is really, a lot of sci-fi is the product of the time it's made. So this is definitely kind of lampooning the 80s and things like that. I mean, when you said about the script, that it's for adults, it's interesting if you look at the BBFC reviews at the time, or the assessments they did to rate it. Obviously, it ended up with an 18 certificate in the UK. But a lot of those, or there's one report where someone ticks that it's a PG theme. Like, a lot of it is PG, but the violence is 18, no doubt about it. And it really pushes it over the edge. And I think that's what's kind of remarkable about the whole thing as well, is that you'd have thought there would be someone saying, hey, this would work almost as a PG film, and have the push to do that. But the fact that it's as extreme in the violence as it is quite a thing. But obviously, yeah, it did start with the script. So it was written by Ed Neumeier and Michael Miner. Ed Neumeier was he was actually on set for a lot of Blade Runner. And I think when you look at the original script, you can see that he was very influenced by that. And he really wanted Delta City to sort of be this almost futuristic place. But this film was made on a relatively low budget. I think it's like $13 million. So it was a lot more than Orion had stumped up for the Terminator, which become like a massive, massive hit. But that was a low budget film. So it was a lot more than that. But still, in the scheme of action films, 13 million wasn't that much back in 1987. And about $1 million of that apparently went just on the suit. But Ed Neumeier had this idea, I think, for a police officer who become like a sort of, had been in an accident and become like a lot more powerful and things. Michael Miner had this idea called Super Cop, where it was someone who was being slowly upgraded. And they kind of, when they met they were sort of bandying ideas around and said, hey, we've got these similar ideas, and started to merge it into this one thing, which was Robocop. Obviously in the UK we had a comic strip called 2000 AD, and there's a lot of influence you can see from the Judge Dredd comic strip in 2000 AD. There's definitely a lot of differences as well. There's a lot more humanity to Alex Murphy and Robocop, but there's a very big crossover, to the point that even some of the early suit designs really did look like Judge Dredd. And the fact that the line "Come quietly or there will be trouble," I think actually appears on the front cover of an issue of 2000 AD. And it's a shame that the two characters have never met in a crossover, because it would be good to see it. But there's definitely an influence that they took from that. But in terms of the budget, it meant that these ideas of doing it in a Blade Runner style city, they couldn't happen. It had to be more grounded, which I think really works for the film, actually. And obviously the deviations they took from Judge Dredd, because at the end of the day, they were making a Judge Dredd movie, really helped with it. But when you say about the how well it's put together, I mean, it's a very lean movie, so it's about 100 minutes.
Right.
And the sort of events maybe take place over 6 months, possibly a year, and a lot of movies take place over like a day or two, so it really packs a lot into that time. There's not one scene you could lose out of this film, really, because there's no fat in it at all. And the thing that I've taken the most when I've rewatched it, last time I saw it was just under a year ago in the cinema, and we live in a world of YouTube movie clips and stuff like that now, and you seen some of the wonderful scenes in this film. But when I've watched it as a whole, it's just how well the whole thing holds together, how pacey it is. Every scene that you can't imagine it leading into another scene. It's just so lean, yeah. So I think it's probably coming across that I like the film, isn't
it?
Richard, I mean, what do you think compared to what we got in vogue now, which is like 3-hour movies? This is quite a time.
Yeah,
it's
a good point. It's a good point that he made. I didn't realize it's true actually that this film actually in the end is, I was about to say short, but not in a bad way. I mean, it's true. It's packed with a lot of things for a movie, which is like, I don't know, an hour, 40 minutes, an hour and a half. So yeah, I didn't think about that. But yeah, that's good. I mean, compared to nowadays, it's true. Actually, but I think we made a joke about this, by the way, a few weeks ago about something else. Apparently, but actually, to be taken seriously nowadays, you need to do long movies, and I never understood why, to be honest. So yeah, that's actually a good recipe. Actually, but in the end, it doesn't matter how long the movie is. If you have good ideas, that's what matters. And talking about ideas, so this guy, so you tell me if I'm wrong, James. You said Neumayer, that's his name, the writer? Neumayer?
Ed Neumayer and Michael Miner, yes.
Okay. So this guy, Neumayer, when you say his name, I didn't know, to be honest, I didn't look online to see who wrote Robocop. But when you say his name, I checked now because he's ringing the bell. He also at least adapted the screenplay for Starship Troopers. He also, I think
he actually, yes. So it's a book, isn't it, originally? So
yeah,
that is actually 10 years after Robocop, and it's the sort of reunion of Paul Verhoeven with Ed Neumayer, Michael Miner, and the composer Basil Poledouris as well.
Okay, yeah, so that's not surprising to me because, again, I think we're going to deal a little later, but if we talk about the script, again, what I like the most is definitely the ideas. I mean, I'm not going to say that they were shocking ideas, but at least the fact that they address mistakes made by society, it maybe comes from bad guy actually, because Starship Troopers also deals with that kind of stuff, to be honest. I never actually did the math. I never realized actually that this guy actually was related to Robocop until now, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know if we can talk about more about these things, about the topics of let's say, about the subjects, the different subjects with the S at the end of Robocop. we should talk about them later. You tell me, Jason.
Yeah, of course, because it seeds so much in it. I mean, for 90 minutes, 89 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to talk about this.
You're talking about corporate structure and politics. I suppose now, of course, we're already in the age of big private corporations taking over big essential sectors of city life and services. And this is all seeded back in 1987. You were like shocking then and thinking, how could a private company be allowed to run a police, something as essential and fundamental as a police department or service in a city? Now you think you probably wouldn't be, that strained out. I mean, we've had private firms who run prison services, and to made the headlines for better or for worse. So it's fulfilled all of that's been seeded or hinted at in that movie. Their satire, you always think, how could it happen? But now you think, it's happened. This is probably why when you rewatch it, you still find it's even more relevant as every time you seem to watch it as the years go by, which is, I mean, it is based in it's from the 80s, but it's corporate, it's greed, it's avarice, but that's part and parcel of what private companies are, and that's it's an engine, but now it kind of manifests into everyday life. It's scary, but yeah. I mean, other aspects I would say is probably addresses technology. Kind of like it's how we're integrating, what's our relationship with it. But yeah, I mean, these are all kind of like parts of good sci-fi, really. But then, like I said, put it in a genre, it's difficult because now it's even as action and glory as gory as some of it is. It's comic book gory. I mean, yes, I think it went for. Actually, it went from when the first cut was an X certificate. With an X certificate in the US, you're not allowed to even publicize that on TV channels, which is the death knell for any film release. So I think to go back to the cutting room floor and cut a few seconds here and there just to get it's restricted.
But I have a feeling that when I watched it when I was a kid, I might be wrong because I said it's
no, you're right. Yeah. You're going to say that it was more violent, and the version you would have watched the other day would have.
Yeah, well, yes, but at the same time, I forgot the violent scenes that I watched a week ago. So I'm wondering if there was not a version that I watched when I was a kid that had like the most violent scenes cut, literally. Is there?
Well, there was on ITV, so ITV showed it and cut all the violence out of it. And actually, unusually, if you buy the Arrow edition, Blu-ray or 4K, it's actually got the TV version on it, which has alternative shots and there's no blood. There's actually no swearing to the point that the word scumbag is changed to crumbag, which is totally ridiculous. But the theatrical cut was the only version available worldwide for a long time. But the version that's probably mostly easiest to find now, Murphy's death is longer, and the Ed 209 sequence, particularly at the start, is longer.
That must be it. When I watched, obviously, when I was in France back in, I said I was like not even 12 years old when I watched it the first time in my life, and for sure, the scene that you mentioned actually that was shocking to me now is what I call the execution, literally, of Murphy, because he's not even killed. He's execution by 5 different people, literally. That scene, I can't remember something like that. And knowing myself back in the day at 12 years old, I could get scared quite easily. I wouldn't have slept for a week after watching a scene so violent. So probably, actually, that was a cut version that I saw. For sure.
It is. I think a lot of. I mean, it was aimed at adults, but of course, it just reached the public, kind of like I suppose, foray into, different age groups because maybe your older brother or sister. It was such a phenomenon at that time. A big summer movie, let's say. But then over here in the UK, it came filtered down on video very quickly, and so everyone started talking about it. But it's a good movie. That's the thing. It's not just a movie. So as a kid, you get you start to watch it, but it is very tough watch that you probably look away for a while before you like those films like Alien or something like that. If you're watching at a very young age, you tend to watch away, but you still love the movie even as a kid. It's just a bit above what your age group is, but that was that time when it was very adult themes, even though you are dealing with in the shell of a comic book story almost. It's this super cop or superhero almost in a modern form. I mean, they even make a line about it. It's the comic book heroes that only their parents would read about in comic books, but now a reality in that day and age. So yes, anything other thoughts about the script before? Because I think we've, as it is, especially done by.
Just to say on the violence, I think Murphy's death is probably the reason this film will always carry an 18 certificate. I think the other scenes, bizarrely, as violent as they are, you could almost argue that OTT comic book moments, even the Ed 209, even Emil melting at the end. Just to say, we're obviously doing spoilers in this, if you haven't guessed already. But I think the level of sort of sadism in Murphy's death, it's a big thing for the BBFC here, is like dwelling on the infliction of pain and injury. And I think it's definitely the most cut thing in the theatrical one. And even the cut version is really difficult to watch. In fact, there's almost an element with the longer version where I feel it doesn't need to go into that, because it almost becomes slightly more comic booky. And I think it's really important at that moment that you sympathize with the character, that you don't think it's funny. And I think that's where this movie really throws people. Is Ed Neumeier said there was like an approach where they were playing a lot of the comedy, but a lot of the violence as comedy. So when you look at some of those scenes, Ed 209, it's not really violence, it's an accident. It's something that sort of goes wrong. So it's like a sick gag, especially when someone says, someone call a goddamn paramedic, and it's like the guy is just like absolutely exploded. The paramedic's going to do nothing at that point, although someone needs to take him away. Likewise, the toxic waste scene is kind of like he happens to be there. Well, it's kind of like a sick gag as well, and then it gets sicker and sicker as it goes. But I think those things are almost containable at 15 these days. They were a huge, obviously, shock to people back then. But it's almost become like a touchstone for, I think, films like The Terminator and Robocop were really influential on what's come after, and we'll talk about that obviously later. But I think even the media breaks at the start, like the original script, I'm sure there's a lot more action at the start. I think it starts with Fredrickson, the cop who's mentioned on the news, who dies. I think it starts with the script with Clarence and the guys killing him. So it's more of like a traditional action piece. Like it's a bit cliche now to have a news segment at the start, and they probably took a bit of inspiration from things like Network for that. But to have that at the top of an action film, and I do worry about it actually, because the great thing about those media breaks is they shot them on videotape rather than film, to be sort of authentic to what you had in the 80s. However, obviously, when you've had HD and 4K transfers of this, I'm always concerned that people don't even get past the first 3 minutes, because they put this film on, they go, oh my God, the picture quality is terrible, I'm not going to watch this. But obviously, once you get to the film, it's fine. But those media breaks are literally sort of separate it into a 3-act structure. And there was going to be one at the end as well, but the final scene was so impactful, or what ended up being the final scene, the final words in the film, went down so well with audiences, they thought you can't top that, and they just stripped that last media break out.
I think it's as you say, it bookmarks. You watch it, it bookmarks everything so well. These media breaks. It is such a well used technique in this film. It kind of I mean, those are the nicest parts of satire. Also, when it's but they mention, it's technology turning on people who've put it into place for the first time. Like there's this array satellite that has a malfunction later on and kills the president accidentally, or ex-presidents accidentally. This is probably right after the scene where maybe Robocop is part of his malfunctioning, or rather the reawakening of the McSmurphy part of it. But it is.
They mentioned. I think didn't they mention the Star Wars satellites?
Yeah, the Star Wars satellite. That's right.
That because I think it was during that time when the movie was released that actually Reagan had seriously had a project of a Star Wars station.
Yeah, the Missile Defense Program Initiative. Yeah,
different program to protect actually the country from the Cold War, etc. So, and he called it the Star Wars project. I think, but anyway, it's just a detail. But
I think Lucas had a bit of a problem with that, but he went ahead anyway. So I mean, like I said, there's this satirical spine going through it, and it is a look at American culture, and it's put to its credit. I think what works is because you've got a foreign pair of eyes basically commentating and narrating this from a film point of view, and that's Paul Verhoeven, who took this on board. Read. I think the script was going around the houses initially, and everyone was reading it and saying no, it's great, but no. And I think the title is a bit of a problem initially if you just don't know what the actual, without reading the script. Robocop, it's very very generic and it sounds a bit cheesy. And so I think the story is he threw it. He dismissed it out and without even reading it. Then his wife, I think on a holiday, read it and said, "No, actually, go back and read this." James, I mean, you mentioned that Paul Verhoeven did it was his first big American film, I think. This one.
So he'd sort of done a couple of films in Holland, noticeably Turkish Delight and Soldier of Orange with Rutger Hauer in the 70s, and they were really well received in his homeland. He then did a coming-of-age film called Spetters in 1980 that was just so controversial, and everybody hated it. People on the left hated it, people on the right hated it. Even though, and actually over the years, people have sort of come around to it, but it was very, it caused a lot of friction between him and the film. They have like a film funding thing in Holland, or they certainly did there, where they would approve scripts, and I think it was sort of by the government would give you a loan or grant to make your film. And with Spetters, they said, this film's perverse, decadent, what have you need to change the script. So he did, and then he got his money and he made the original script with that and said, you can't do anything, which I think is fair enough. But there was a lot of pushback over that film. He then did The Fourth Man, and he was getting to a point where it was just becoming very difficult for him to make films in Holland. There was so much sort of pushback and stuff from all angles. So then he makes Flesh and Blood with Rutger Hauer in 1985, and that is an English language film, but it is filmed in Spain, and it's co-funded with US money and European money to get it made, and that was made for Orion. So that was his first big attempt to make a film. In a parallel universe, Paul Verhoeven could have directed Return of the Jedi. And this is kind of unbelievable, this little fact. So Soldier of Orange, 1977, is a war film, and it goes down really well. Steven Spielberg sees the film and is blown away by it. He then thinks of Empire Strikes Back is being shot, and he thinks of suggesting Paul Verhoeven as the director. He thinks of suggesting him to George Lucas, saying, look, this guy did Soldier of Orange. He's definitely the guy to do Return of the Jedi. The story goes, Steven Spielberg then saw Spetters and was so disgusted by it, he was like, I'm not recommending that guy to George Lucas. So Robocop becomes his first sort of foray into big American sci-fi, and he moved to the States to shoot it. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the suit, how much that cost. It was designed by Rob Bottin. There was a story there's a really good short documentary called Flesh and Steel, which used to be on earlier editions on DVD and Blu-ray of Robocop, that just gives you a good sort of overview of everything. And there was a bit where they talk about the suit and where Paul Verhoeven gets very animated. I found it always difficult to understand what he was saying about this. But I heard something recently where they were saying, basically, he come up with a design which was quite similar to what we got, I think, in the final movie. They then said, no, it's got to be like a big superhero thing, and it's got to look really bold and stuff. So Rob Bottin did all this for them, and then they realized that looked ridiculous and that they would be better off going back to the slimline version. And I think communication really broke down on set with Rob Bottin and Paul Verhoeven, which Paul Verhoeven now says is entirely his fault. He takes responsibility, but I think on the set they weren't actually speaking, but they went back to a sort of sleeker version. Ed Neumeier, the writer, says it's like if Braun made a knight in shining armor, Braun, the 80s company. And when you think about it, everything in the 80s was silver. Like, you get TVs and the outside would be silver. In the noughties, then you had iPods and everything was white. And then you get into the 2000s and 10s and everything sort of like black and sleek. And to that end, I do think in the remake, I know people have got different opinions on it, but it's almost like if Apple had made a knight in shining armor at that point. But the way that they reveal it in the final movie, you don't really see it. So you get those scenes where Murphy or Robo is being operated on. They're saying remove his arm, he's got Kevlar and all that, and then he wakes up, and as he walks, you just catch a glimpse of him in one of the sort of monitors on the side. And then when he walks through the police station, he's obscured by sort of frosted glass. And they said that was a way that they were always concerned if they just suddenly went, here we are, we're in it's futuristic, but it's sort of realistic. If they just dropped in this character and people rejected that design, that suit design, the film wouldn't work. If he looked like Judge Dredd, the film would not work. So they were very careful to slowly kind of reveal that suit. And I think it works really well. But in terms of the production, I mean, they shot this in 1986, obviously, but it was in Dallas in apparently one of the hottest summers they had. And it just took a massive toll on Peter Weller. They had to rehydrate him constantly because of how much water he was losing through the heat and stuff. And the story goes that it took 10 hours to get the suit, 10 or 11 hours to get the suit on the first time. Although I would add, they would have been refitting it at that time. So he worked with a movement coach as well called Monia Kim. And apparently this was a bit of a problem because they devised the movements before they practiced them in the suit because the suit wasn't ready. And they then tried to just launch into filming. And Peter Weller said, well, all the things I've done, I can't do now because this suit is so heavy, it's so uncomfortable, and it's going to look ridiculous. So they actually gave him more time to practice. And they just slowed all the movements down. So when you look, he's very sort of, they're sort of like bird-like movements, but they're very sort of slow and things. But it really works well to give you the impression that it's not just a guy wearing some armor on a set. It really does look good. I think that movement's really part of what sells the character as well.
It's it's a beautiful suit. I think credit to the producers who networked and really got the best people for the budget in play on this on this production. I mean, you've got some Phil Tippett did some great puppetry or stop motion animation, which is probably the film that kind of like phased out where we could come into the end of that era and before the CG era. But it suits probably this story, and when you're dealing with mechanical movements and the Ed 209, and but Rob Bottin obviously did the thing. I mean, it's some great one of those great craftsmen. But the suit looks beautiful. You're right, yeah. The slow reveal. I was thinking, just rewatching it. If they did straight on, just reveal, just straight onto the camera, you'd probably won't buy into it. I think you do have to slowly be introduced to it bit by bit, and then just see how elegant it is. But yeah, I think part of selling that is Peter Weller and his movements. I think taking on board, even though he had to really relearn, because I think the suit was delivered only last minute before he could start filming, so he had to rethink, as you say, his movements. But it's a difficult sell. A person in a latex suit. We've seen so many films where it just comes out ridiculous, but this does work. I mean, great lighting. I think it's something sort. I mean, it looks beautiful sometimes. Even though it looks, it's down and dingy. It's the budget. It just looks beautiful, especially some of the lighting in the suit.
It's interesting, actually, you say that, because when you've got the sort of artwork of the main poster is iconic, and it's a painting of the shot where he gets out of the petrol station. But in that shot, that sort of iconic image, the helmet is red because of the light sort of reflecting off of it. And particularly in scenes like the one where he first goes into the mum and pop store, his first arrest, you can really see all the like fluorescent lights they've got round that shop are really sort of reflecting in the suit. And it's like almost like I think this would be the way to push it if they do it anymore, is almost have it like it's a chameleon thing, because people always say the suit in the first and third movie are grey and then it's blue in the second one. It's sort of true, but there are scenes where it looks like it's the colour of the set. And I think particularly in that scene where you've got those fluorescent lights, it just looks amazing. Obviously, you don't see the reflection of the camera crew, but you get all these reflections of the lights and stuff, and it looks great.
I also remarked because of the big chrome and the big kind of like hulking metal, it kind of like, I always thought it kind of triggered off the spirit of Detroit, which is this yesteryear a big motor car industry, or it certainly was back in the day, and then it kind of like that that industry kind of faded away, and so that Detroit, a lot of his economic downturn was reflected in that. But it kind of reflected, because it is a Detroit story, or very front and center, so it kind of does kind of resemble that kind of Americana motor car industry of the US at that time. So,
and you've got obviously the steel mill, which is where Murphy's executed and where him and Lewis go back to later, and you have the final showdown with Clarence, and it's just like this massive, obviously man-made structure that's decaying, isn't it? So it feels very sort of
the urban decay
appropriate. Yeah,
it's almost like, well, I mean,
great location.
It is a fantastic location. This is like, these are sets. You've got sets, you've got matte paintings, but it just it's Dallas. I think part of it's shot in Dallas, where they've had some great buildings there, very futuristic buildings for its time. Which is,
and I think that's one of the sort of unique things in a way. I mean, other films had done it a little bit, but I think of Alien, and they always said with that, it like the Nostromo is not gleaming. It's a worked-in space, and it looks gritty. And in Robocop, you've really got a mix of that sort of futuristic gleaming stuff, but also the sort of dirtiness and things that have been run down and neglected. You do get this thing as well that sometimes in the OCB boardrooms, it feels like they're using a steady cam, and you've got these gliding shots, everything's smooth. It's like that's where the money is. And then you get down into the police station, and it's on a sort of shaky cam, and it's like there's no money here for us to, I think little touches like that are fantastic in it.
It's both epic and it's raw at the same time. This is the strange thing about this film, because you've got, and I think it's helped a lot by the Basil Polaris score on it, which informs so much of this movie. I think it works, one of those great movies where sometimes you just don't have any dialogue going, and then a lot of internal narrative, especially with Murphy, where he's rediscovering that he was actually a person, that he was Alex J. Murphy. He's not he has a past. He's actually a person. This reawakening, or when he's, riding into town, it's almost like the sheriff, and it's comic book, and then it's grand, and it's like epic. And this is what adds to its why it seems not only just bigger than life, but it seems an epic tale when you. And I think, I don't know what you think of the score, but I think it adds so much.
The score's amazing, and they did do this thing of using different elements of, there's more electronic sounds when you've got the sort of sci-fi bits, and then there's more traditional musical instruments they're using in some of the more emotional beats that are harking back to Murphy's real life. But that sort of it gets nicknamed the Robo March. If you get the soundtrack, it's not called that, but that main theme from Robocop, I think, is brilliant. When you listen to something like Alan Silvestri's Avengers theme, which is really one of the most recognizable scores probably of recent modern cinema, it's up there with that. It's just really rousing, and he returned on the third film, and it's the best thing. I mean, there's not a lot of good things about the third film, but it's the best thing about that film is having him back, and also building on the themes that he had originally. And it's really missed, I think, in the second film. But yeah, it does so much work in those scenes. It's great.
I think that this is kind of like a lot of that spirit of where this movie is, or how to regard it when you're watching it. It is it informs so much of the viewer. You find that in a lot of films where there's not much dialogue, but then it relies. I say John Williams' work as well. If you've seen in Star Wars or so forth, or any Spielberg film, a lot of the internal narratives all just told orally. Right. Well, this is the film that's got a lot of great characters. All right, you've got Robocop, but every single one, you've got probably some great character actors in this film. Whatever the role, it's like there's no duff note in it, kind of thing. Is there any particular performance
I think you can
just that you kind of feel like is worthy of a mention here?
And really, when you look at the film, there's only about sort of 10 main characters, I'd say, in it, which I think is sort of a good number. Some are a little bit more supporting than others. Obviously, we talked about Peter Weller is Alex Murphy and Robocop. They obviously needed someone who was sort of slender enough body-wise to put that suit on and for it to not look ridiculous. There's always stories that Arnold Schwarzenegger was considered for this. I don't think he was ever really approached, because they knew there was just no way that they could put him in that suit, to be honest, and move him about. But also there's that argument, a bit like with 1995's Judge Dredd, of if you have a big A-list actor, are you really going to obscure their face for the whole movie? They're probably not going to like that. So they have Peter Weller. He's a really great actor, and I have heard Ed Neumeier say that there was some pushback over why are we really paying someone to, an actor like that when we're not seeing them? Can't we just get anybody, like a stunt guy or something, like with Michael Myers? But he argued that you do need someone who can convey the sort of emotions Murphy's going through. And I think you do. It's amazing how much sympathy he gets for his character, considering he's only Murphy for about 20 minutes of the film before he's executed or crucified. So You don't really get to spend much time with him at all. The fact as well that you never see his family apart from in flashbacks really helps put you in his position. So this theme of the lost paradise, we're kind of like there as well, because we've never met his wife, we've never met his son. We're experiencing these things that he as Robo later, he's not really even remembering. That line that he says, I can feel them but I can't remember them, he's got like these fractured elements, and it's almost like he's now, he's still got a brain, he still can remember this stuff, but there's a section that's not working anymore, and he's kind of, sort of paralyzed by that or something. I think it's a really interesting thing, and whether he's actually dead or not. I mean, when the length of the execution, I think, is justified, because everybody I've watched this movie with over the years, and I've made a lot of people sit through this movie, and not all of them have enjoyed it, but having it that long, it's not like he's shot with a laser gun and then the next thing he's Robocop, because you'd say, well, take that stuff off and you'll be Alex Murphy underneath. You watch him and you know that he's died, because no one would survive that.
I have a question for this, James.
Yeah, go.
That's something actually a bit. There's a scene that, well, confusing is a strong word. It's not like it took me out of the movie, but for me, that guy was dead. I know it sounds stupid, but he was 100% dead. But the people at the hospital tried to revive him. There's a scene actually where they try to revive him, and the guy has been shot like 10 times, and including in the head. I'm not talking about the people, the scientists who are part of the Robocop project, but they are actually literally hospital staff trying to revive him. And I was thinking, but there's no point. That's so weird that this was left in the movie. Because
that's great. That is great, Richard, because everybody says that, and I think it's very, very, very deliberate. Right, so it makes you go. Why are they doing that? This guy is definitely dead. I think if that scene wasn't there, but apparently the other weird thing is that they wrote this into the script thinking it was a bit silly, but paramedics said that is true. They would actually do that because they just
try.
Need to
they will try.
Almost just to, they know the guy's not coming back, and if so, what sort of life are they going to have, right? But it's like, we just need to sort of tick this box or whatever just to certify this. The other thing to note is the people in that scene are genuine paramedics, I believe. So they got people in who were going to advise some actors, and then they were like, well, shouldn't we just use these guys? And it feels very documentary, that bit. The way they're speaking, it's not very theatrical. So they are real paramedics. And they said they would do that. But the other tiny little fact or sort of bit that comes into play later is that I think they have a conversation when you go to the scientist and you're seeing from his point of view. They make a reference to having to make sure that he's legally dead or something. So it's kind of part of that sort of thing where they can go, right, we definitely didn't, almost clearing their names of whatever we did, there was no guy to bring back, which possibly means that they knew that there would be a problem going forward with it.
Do you mean that actually that the fact that guy was dead, for them, it makes it right what they did?
I think it's more of a legal thing to cover themselves at a later date, because the film is very cynical for a start. I think it's more that. But I think dramatically, it really works because it makes you go, the guy's dead in your brain. So you're kind of watching it. So when he comes back to life, it's like, that the guy's died because you've seen it. If there was a lesser version of that, I think you would think that he could strip all that material off and he would be Alex Murphy again. I mean, there is a line in the second film, which isn't necessarily canon, but says, you're just a couple of chunks on a table. You're not even a corpse or something like that, which is pretty brutal. But it's a good point, like how much of him does remain after all of that.
think you're right. It does kind of press on the point. There is nothing left. There's no soul. It's completely brain dead. I mean, because I guess we're so used to people being shot and so forth, and then you see them in flashback. Oh, they're alive again. And I think this really presses the point. Even the audience has gone on that journey. There's nothing of him left. He's complete. The soul has gone as well. There's nothing. Like it can rest on that, and then which plays into this mystery. Well, how can there be anything left, and what is left? Is it actually what is manifest as Robocop? Is that really him? And I think this is the whole.
And Paul Verhoeven. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Say Paul Verhoeven. So apparently he's not religious, but he says he's fascinated with the historic figure of Jesus Christ. And obviously, in this scene, it is essentially a crucifixion. So the idea that he's shot in the hand first and things like that, finally shot in the head, and the idea is that you then get the resurrection later in the film. So it's kind of an allegory for that. He talks about him as an American Jesus, doesn't he?
Yeah, the American Jesus. I mean, there's so many religious little nods or kind of like tapestries going on. I mean, even in where they have the showdown in the steel mill, it's almost like some Dante's circle of hell. But the whole story is the American Jesus is the resurrection story. It is he gets crucified, not just killed but crucified. Figuratively speaking, at the beginning, the resurrection of Robocop, or as Robocop, whatever that is. And then I was thinking when rewatching it, there is almost then a crucifixion of Robocop, or what he is, or what has been awakened as, when he gets hunted down by the police, or he's framed, and then again he's just shot to pieces by his colleagues or the police force, absolutely destroyed. And then I think that's at that point then he kind of like resurfaces again and resurrects again. That's when Murphy comes to the fore, I think it's that mask of it. And that's when you notice then, I mean, again, great subtleties in performance and how it's directed. The voice is less metallic. He starts talking about he doesn't feel, he can remember the past, or he doesn't feel hungry. He's not going to be dictated to. He's not following this routine. He's kind of very much, even a sly smile. You can almost imperceptibly see a little bit of a smile here and there as the film is coming to its climax. And I think we're all kind of like hoping as we watch, is Murphy there? Is it real? And we come wishing it to happen.
I think that's a good point, because people are in the script. He is written as Robo after he's killed. But I was thinking and apparently that's how Peter Weller wanted to be referred to on set. I was thinking that's kind of strange, because watching the film when I was, when I first watched it, I wanted him to be Murphy again. That's kind of the whole point. And I know some people refer to the characters as Murphy, Robo, and then Robo Murphy. Some people hate that, but the idea of, and you then get, after the second crucifixion, you get another media break, and we're then into the third section of the film, where he takes the helmet off, and that's kind of one of those superhero tropes of the hidden identity as well, isn't it? That it's usually hidden from the public in old comic books.
It's a great. I mean,
but he's hidden from himself, and when he takes that off, I can't stress enough like how amazing that prosthetic sort of thing, that the whole face when he takes that off, how it looks, because he says you might not like what you're going to see, and you think it might be another. We've been in this Paul Verhoeven movie for an hour. It's going to be hideous, right? And he just looks sort of angelic in that, and it's amazing how that those effects haven't dated. It still really looks like he's wired into a machine, but his face is perfectly preserved. And I always wondered on Robocop 2, why has he got that mask on again? Because we don't need that. It serves no narrative purpose anymore. But the truth is, the suit and that makeup effect would take ages to put someone into if you were going to try and shoot a whole movie that way. I don't think Pete Weller was massively keen to come back and do a second film, but did because of how uncomfortable that suit was. But I think now you could do that. You could do that digitally and make that look really good. But yeah, he's kind of, there's a line that Michael Miner says where he's trampled on by the good guys and the bad guys. And that's the thing, he's executed by Clarence and his gang. And then as Robocop, he's executed by his colleagues, you know, at the behest of...
It's not that transition. It's kind of, that's why I kind of like... Yeah, it kind of like, of course, Murphy dies. He transforms into Robocop, or this entity. This, but at the beginning, they don't even recognize. I mean, he's just OCP product. He's not a person. He's product, as one of the, as they're told, walk. One of the executives kind of tells one of the police officers he's OCP product. He's not a person, and that's how they like to think of him. Then, of course,
he never refers to him. So obviously, the final scene is when they say, "Nice shooting, son. What's your name?" And he says Murphy, and that's the first time that he actually refers to himself as that. Because prior to that, he is talking in the third person. He says to Lewis, "Murphy had a wife and son. What happened to them?" He never says that Murphy was him. So it's only that he sort of self-identifies as Murphy right in the end. And apparently this just went down so well with test audiences that they took out the final scene.
Well, that's when I think film naturally ends, because yes, I do know. Then I think there were another media break after that, apparently originally filmed, where you follow Anne Lewis in the hospital, and she kind of like says, "Yes, she's going to be okay," and it's tough, and if it's tough in the kitchen, you get out of it. But that was when it was supposed to end on another media break. But then, like you said, I think audiences, there's even cheering. And then even if you watch it, you kind of like, you're waiting for him, "Nice shooting, son." And he says, what's your name? And he ends with, Robocop is what he's known as. But then he says, of course, Murphy. And that's like, he's reclaimed his soul again, which is basically, it is what that story is the art of it's like running spiritual soul of that story is this fiction comic, whatever you want to call it. You're just following, can he come back? And that's what you're following. And he, there's great foes, kind of, he almost faces the devil himself, which is, I guess a great performance by Kurtwood Smith, who's as a villain as you can get, but he even crucified, even like in that climax, he puts a spear through his chest, and again, it's this Jesus analogy that keeps coming up. And even at that climax, he walks on the water. You can see there's purposely he's walking towards Kurtwood Smith at the end as their final confrontation, good and evil. But you see him actually walking on the water as an obvious kind of Jesus reference, and it is. And when that's met, it's such a justification that he's come back, and he's again, you don't really call it a revenge story, but it is quite satisfying to say the good has triumphed over evil in those comic book terms. But it's really cheering.
And the thing with the good and bad in this is it's quite unusual for Paul Verhoeven to have these very clear cut goodies and baddies, and I think the more clear cut maybe in this than any other film. So you do have these like a sort of rogue. I mean, Kurtwood Smith, I think there's something of this come out 2 years before Batman 89, and there's something about something Joker-esque about him, isn't there? He laughs like a maniac. He takes pleasure in pain. He doesn't do these kind of mind games that I think you would think were quite silly, but he's got that real scary element to him. I mean, there's just nothing kind of redeeming about the guy.
Chaos and glee in what he does. He just unapologetically just does what he does, which not very, very comic bookish. But
he'd almost be like a pantomime character if it wasn't for the things that he was doing was so evil. and the violence wasn't so graphic, so I think he's fantastic casting in this. Nancy Allen obviously plays Anne Lewis, Murphy's partner, and she sort of is sort of the one trying to pull him back, really, and make him remember who he is, and sort of sends him on that journey. I think the journey where he goes home is like really central to the film. It's that sort of a scene that could almost be cut, but I think it would be a completely different movie if you did. And that heart of the film, I think, sort of sets it aside that, yeah, there's all this violence and action, but really it's about that he's looking for that home, that obviously he can't find his wife and kid when he does visit. And the score at that point is fantastic as well.
Great scenes. These are great scenes, actually. But I don't. If they remove these scenes, it will make no sense to us. These scenes actually, where you can see through his eyes, his past moments with his family, I thought actually were maybe the best scenes of the movie, to be honest. And the fact actually that they were smart enough to do that in the first person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, it's this bleeding of his subconscious, and it's like this is the awakening of that human part or that soul. I mean, I think when the producer said kind of like if the heart is strong enough, then the soul will return. Words to this effect. So this is kind of like his fight to come back. So there's not much spent in this kind of like comic book shoot 'em up, as in taking out the bad guys. It is this story then shifts gear very quickly into this very soulful story, which is dwelling on that is like, would you do that in the comic book movies of yesteryear or even today? It's probably why it has such a longevity to it. So I mean, this is a film that is now coming up to 36 years old, let's say now, and it's very much a film with a legacy, and there have been sequels and toys. Even though it wasn't aimed at that market, it obviously very quickly translated into cartoons and toys and merchandise, and the name now is kind of like as ridiculous as initially it probably was an initial script. It's synonymous now. People say it with pride. It's Robocop. It's nothing to shirk at. Well, I suppose we could talk about what its legacy is on today, really. And I think it kind of like really does touch on basically. I think the most appealing thing to me were two aspects. It's probably are kind of like our marriage with technology now. I mean, we are in the age of AI and integrating ourselves with technology, and are we going to be lost in it? That and corporate politics. I think that's it's quite intriguing how that kind of has manifested into everything now. But us being swung to technology, I think it's a legacy. So, Richard, do you have any thoughts on maybe why this film has actually gets mentioned in circles nowadays?
Well, I think actually that it's. I think that the main idea is that actually that it's. Again, he has ideas that are consequences or actually reflects on the current society. What we didn't mention so far is the concept of transhumanism, but is, for me, it's actually something actually that struck me actually when I watched the movie. It's more than any other sci-fi movie. It's in the best depiction of what some people actually today actually think actually is the next step of science and evolution, which is using technology to try to be careful what I'm saying here, but make actually human beings better, if you know what I mean, and almost immortal. And in a way, that's what they're trying to do. Well, obviously, the purpose is not just for immortal, but it's just for more security in the perfect cop. But I was thinking the idea that a bit what Elon Musk is doing now is trying to do, or he wants to do, which is try to improve the human body to with trying to make like a mix between human and robots. And it's actually an idea that has been in sci-fi for a while, and I think that Robocop is maybe the best depiction on screen that I've seen, and it's something that I've read in novels, etc. The idea of using robotic elements to improve the human body.
Yes, I think I agree with those points that it's definitely kind of like as in a legacy, it does. It's one of those fears of this movie as you're watching it is, are we going to be lost in our technology, even get augmented as we are, or improved, quotation marks. It's where how much influence are we going to have in the real world, and how much is going to be, preordained as technology. It's like what our relationship will be, how much control we have, those kind of things. James, I'll open the question to you. What do you think our legacy is of Robocop? I mean, 30 years on, it still gets mentioned in there and remade recently, and so forth. And it is.
I mean, rightfully so. I think it often gets forgotten that it was nominated for 2 Oscars for sound and film editing. It won neither, but it did get a special effects editing award, especially for the sound effects. So it did make a huge impact at the time. And then since then, we've had novelizations, toy lines, 2 cartoon spin-offs, arcade and video games, comic book adaptations, including a crossover with a Terminator. Incidentally, there was going to be a Predator crossover as well, but that got cancelled. Sequels, 2 live-action TV spin-offs, a reboot, and appearances in Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One and in Mortal Kombat 11. Plus, Robocop also fought alongside Sting in a tag team for WCW once. So you can't keep a good robot down.
No.
I wasn't reading that list at all, but it's one of those things where you go, there's actually quite a lot of merch, and we are in this world now where that things keep living with IP, and there's always attempts to do new things. As we're speaking, there is a video game for the PS5 called Rogue City, a Robocop game, which is due to land in the middle of this year. And there's also an extensive documentary which was funded through Kickstarter called RoboDoc, which a lot of the guys and girls on the Robocop archive have contributed towards. And I think that's going to turn up on Shudder later this year. Obviously, the immediate kind of legacy is this is one of Paul Verhoeven's, what he calls his psychotic trilogy, apparently. So this, Total Recall and Basic Instinct, he says, are about duality. There's sort of characters with 2 dimensions. He's then obviously gone on to do Starship Troopers that we spoke about earlier. I think some of its legacy is just in sort of that window of, when I think about like modern comic books, there's almost like pre-Watchmen and after Watchmen, isn't there? Like 1986, you get Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns, which are sort of adult comic books for the first time. But everything before that was sort of explicitly aimed at kids, and now it's for adults as well. And it's funny that year as well is when they're filming RoboCop, and it's definitely got hallmarks of the comic book movie in it. I think you can see that in the MCU and everything that's sort of come afterwards, really. We should know before that superhero movies were the Superman trilogy and Howard the Duck, so there wasn't a lot to go on. They didn't really adapt that era. But I sort of don't doubt that Tim Burton's Batman wouldn't have been as dark if RoboCop hadn't worked. It really made people see there was something that, I know kids were watching it when they shouldn't be, maybe RoboCop, but there was a thing there. And I mean, even something like Megan that's come out this year, you can really see the influence of something like Robocop that's come before it, particularly with the toy commercials and things like that, and the satire in that film. Because people talk about Megan as a horror, I don't think it is, but I think it's quite a smart satire, and putting that into films, I think, has sort of become its legacy a bit as well.
Yeah, it has the trappings of a comic book shell to it, but I wouldn't say it is. I think even Paul Verhoeven said that it is. It has a shell of the comic book, but it isn't. He likes comic books, but it isn't. It is. It looks like it, but the script is definitely not. And you can see this is why it's very hard to put it. Like that initial question at the top of the show was, what genre is it? And it is so many, made of so many pieces. It all meshes fantastically, almost seems together. But you're picking at it 20 years, 30 years later, maybe even 40 years later, you'll see. I can't put it into one genre, but it is greater than the sum of its whole, or some of its parts, rather than much like Robocop himself. But any final thoughts before we shut down this?
I've got a little fact which I just think never really gets. Maybe it does. Maybe people do know this, but so it's pretty well known that The Living Daylights was the first Bond movie after Roger Moore decided he was too old for the role, and they wanted Pierce Brosnan originally. Fair, obviously, it ended up with Timothy Dalton, but they wanted Pierce Brosnan. Now, the story goes that he was contracted to a show called Remington Steele, which had been cancelled. So he was free to do Bond. But when they announced that he was possibly going to be the next Bond, people started watching Remington Steele again. The viewing figures went up and it got uncancelled. And suddenly, Pierce Brosnan was tied to this show. He couldn't be James Bond anymore. And Timothy Dalton took it over for two movies before Brosnan finally got his shot. This actually impacted Robocop as well. So Anne Lewis was originally cast as Stephanie Zimbalist, and she was the lead in Remington Steele. But because that show carried on, she couldn't now be Lewis, and Nancy Allen come in to take it over at the last minute. So that's just a little bit of trivia I wanted to throw in there.
Shout out to Nancy Allen. I mean, she does again any role in this. It's done. She does wonders. Kind of very, very. I think she's from a family of policemen, so she really did want that role, and she adds a lot to framing. I think the awakening of Alex Murphy.
It's weird because for a film with so much violence in it, I think it's a really positive movie, because at the end of the day, after all they do to him, his soul can't be destroyed. And I think that is quite a positive thing to put in a film.
It's quite a hopeful thing also, I think, for all of us, really, as we kind of march on towards technology and are we going to get swamped by it and so forth. But I would say it is a very, very uplifting film, considering how dark it goes in places. But it's definitely worth a watch, and I'll definitely buy that for $1. I think you agree. Right. Wow. I guess all it usually says thank you to James and Richard for joining me on this special, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Good night.
We hope you enjoyed this film and TV review.com episode. Catch the latest film and TV reviews, together with regular episode content from the world of film and TV every week. See you soon. Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today.